Hello and Happy New Year. Welcome to the Shatterproof Speakers Series. It's 2021, and while last year was chaotic and crazy for so many reasons, this speaker series was actually one of the great things born out of the chaos of 2020. We had a couple of great conversations in 2020, and we thought it was important to keep those conversations going in 2021. Each month, we will be sitting down with different people to talk about different topics as they relate to addiction. Here with me today is ESPN reporter Lauren Sisler. Lauren has an amazing career as a sports reporter, but before she made it to the sidelines of some big sporting events, she suffered a heartbreaking loss of the two most important people in her world, her parents. She is joining us here today to talk about loss, love, grief, and stigma. Welcome, Lauren.
Hello, how are you? So great to join you all. It's always an honor and a blessing to be able to have this conversation and be part of this. And as you said, we're launching right into 2021. And my mantra here is not to think about all the things that we've lost in 2021 or 2020, but the things that we've overcome in 2020. And now here we are with this opportunity to spread a message of hope. And I hope that, those that are listening today will certainly generate some of that from this conversation.
Great, we're so happy to have you. So before we dive into the story and what actually happened, paint us a great picture of who your parents were. What did you love about them? What were they like? Bring us up to speed on that.
My mom and my dad, we grew up in Roanoke, Virginia. It was my mom, my dad, and my older brother, Alan. And, we were a happy family, a family always on the go, as most families are these days, not a lot of downtime, but my brother was a 3-sport athlete and I was a gymnast. And so my parents were always making sure that we got to and from our gymnastics practices, or my brother played football, basketball, baseball. And, there wasn't a time that you wouldn't find my parents on the sidelines cheering us on, or volunteer coaching, or doing something to always stay involved. That's just how my parents were. And they just loved being a part of that. And, they were very loving, charismatic people and just had a really good personality and really woke up every day with a smile on their faces. They loved just being part of the community and, just being part of our lives and helping us to define success and to show us that roadmap to success. And I always felt like my brother and I had everything we needed growing up and everything we needed to succeed. And most importantly, I felt like we had that unconditional love. So I always felt very fortunate to have two very loving parents that really guided us in all of our adventures throughout the early part of our childhood and into our teens and into college.
So for not only for you or your brother, but for everybody surrounding your parents, was it very apparent that they had a struggle with addiction?
Well, early on, growing up throughout our childhood, my dad did struggle with alcoholism, but it was something that I think as a young child, I didn't understand. I didn't really get what was going on. And so I knew that there was some issues there. He might, relapse and drink on the weekend. And I would always hear him and my mom have conversations in the background of, go back to your meetings. We got to get you back in AA. You need to go see your counselors, this, that, and the other. But as a kid, I just, I thought it was under control, and I didn't really understand what alcoholism was. I didn't understand that it was a disease. I didn't understand it was something that was an everyday battle. And so, that was kind of throughout my early part of my childhood. But then as my parents started experiencing chronic pain, my mom had degenerative disc disease and my dad had chronic back pain. So they went to a pain management doctor in Roanoke, Virginia, and they were basically seeking treatment to be able to help with some of that. My mom had multiple surgeries over the course of time. My dad had back surgery as well. My dad also suffered from PTSD from his service in the military. So there was some depression issues there. But again, I just thought mom and dad, they're going to the doctors, they're taking their prescriptions, they're doing everything they're told to do. And it's helping them to function. It's helping them to get out of bed, go to work, do what most normal adults would do. And that's kind of how I viewed it. And again, my parents woke up every day with a smile on their face. I knew they were in pain, but I didn't understand the magnitude or severity of it when I was growing up. And really, I would say later in my teens is when that progression started to escalate, when they started going to this pain management doctor just a few years before their passing.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to paint an accurate picture of who they were and what it looked like, because I think in the minds of a lot of people, addiction looks like the homeless person in the street, the person that can't get it together, that can't hold down a job, that, the people that live on the fringes of society. Your parents were functional, happy, for the most part, healthy people, and this thing was gripping them from underneath, and no one really knew about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the tragedy of all of this, because on the outside, we were that picture perfect family. We were that great all-American middle class family. And that's sort of the picture and the illustration that was projected to those around us, because my parents did everything they could to kind of conceal their battles with addiction, to conceal that. And I think it goes to what we're here talking about today, the stigma. It's the stigma that surrounds addiction. And I think that my parents were drowning in that stigma and that shame. So they were afraid to call out for help. And, I look back and I think about, just sort of the chain of events and what led them down this path. And I think, my parents were two very strong people, but sometimes to a fault, to the point where they would not cry out for help and they would not allow people into their world of addiction, because I think they were afraid of what kind of problems it could cause or challenges, or how it would be reflected on them as parents, and parents of myself and my brother. And they on the outside seem to have it all together and seem to be happy people. And I remember growing up that my house was the one my friends always wanted to come to. I want to hang out with your parents. And you know uh obviously as teenagers and stuff, we'd run upstairs and hang out in my room and stuff. But for the most part, people wanted to be around my parents. They enjoyed spending time with my parents, and um, just to enjoy that relationship. And, I just remember my friends also saying, man, you're so lucky, your parents, take care of you, buy you this, they're always present. They're always there for you. They're always involved in everything you're doing. And, I guess I just felt fortunate, because you see pictures painted elsewhere on media and movies that sometimes parents aren't very present, or, you have a one parent family, or, a single parent family. And I always felt fortunate that I had both of my parents there to support my brother and I.
So now take us back to the events that led up to that horrible day and walk us through what happened.
Well, so I was a gymnast growing up, and my aspirations were set on becoming a collegiate gymnast, earning a scholarship to pay for school. And so, I started sending my recruiting tapes out and was very fortunate to get offered a scholarship at Rutgers University, the state university of New Jersey. And, Rutgers was never on my radar. I never really knew much about Rutgers and really about New Jersey, as someone that comes from Virginia. I lived in the mountains of Virginia. I was a good old country girl. And, um, that was my dream, to take all that time and dedication that I had put towards the sport of gymnastics and be able to, pay it back, right? Pay it back to my parents and the time and money that they spent on the sport of gymnastics. I was in the sport of gymnastics for 18 years. I started when I was 3 years old. So, when I turned 17 and was off to college, my dreams were right there in front of me, everything that I had worked so hard for. And so, I go off to Rutgers. It's about 8 hours from home, and not too far, but far enough, obviously, that, there was an adjustment period. And so, I'm living my dream, and, going through the growing pains that come with being in athletics at the college level, at the D1 level, and, maintaining the grades and figuring out the social life and all those different things that come with kind of becoming an adult. Right. And fast forward to my second semester, and I was studying for some exams and went to set my alarm clock. I was talking to my roommate, and I actually called my parents, that evening, as I always did. I maintained such close relationship with my parents, always talked to my parents, just kept them up to speed on how things were going at practice, my grades, life, everything in between. And I talked to them that night on the phone, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I hung up the phone. We said our I love yous and our goodbyes, and that was it. And I said my prayers and went to bed that night, and remember waking up to a phone call that was ringing on my dresser, and I pick up my cell phone and the caller ID said home. And of course, in that moment, my heart started racing and I realized something's got to be wrong. It's the middle of the night. It's just after 3 o'clock. And I answer the phone with hesitation and my dad's on the other side. And, you could tell something was wrong immediately. And he said, Lauren, I need to talk to your brother. And he's like, I can't get in touch with your brother. I can't find his phone number. I can't get in touch with him. And I said, Dad, what's wrong? And finally he said to me, Lauren, your mom died. And I said, what? I said, Mom died? I don't understand. It's the middle of the night. We just talked. Like, what could have possibly happened? She's not out driving around. Like, what happened? And he said, Lauren, I can't explain it now. Just get on the next plane you can, and I'll be at the airport to pick you up.
So at that point, you had no idea what she had passed away from?
Not a single clue.
Was anything in your mind, like, did your mind go to her struggle with substance use disorder or no?
Nope. My mind never entered into that. And I think, growing up, your mind always races. And as a kid and, a young adult, a young teenager, you think, sometimes you do think the worst. And I guess in my mind, I always thought, my dad struggled with, high cholesterol and, heart problems and this and that. So in my mind, I was always thinking, if something ever happened, a heart attack or something like that. But for my mom, it just didn't make sense. I just don't understand. And so, it never resonated with me that drugs could have been an issue and that the prescription drugs could have been ultimately what took her life.
Got it. So now you've gotten the phone call. I'd imagine you start looking for a flight. What happens next?
Yeah. So, my dad said to get on the next plane that I can. And of course, I'm frantically packing my bags. And mind you, I'm 18 years old at this point. I didn't have a credit card. I didn't have a means of financial support. My parents would put $50 or $100 in my, Rutgers, student account that I would use from time to time. But that's all I needed when I was there. I was, pretty well taken care of. And so, my roommate had to assist me in purchasing my flight home. And, I didn't have a mode of transportation to get to the airport. So I had to run downstairs. I banged on my friend's door. And again, it's the middle of the night and I'm frantic, I'm panicking. And I said, Craig, I need a ride to the airport. My mom's died. I just need your help. And, of course he immediately, woke up, got dressed and took me to the airport. And, I remember that flight home it felt like an eternity. All I wanted to do was get home and run and jump in my dad's arms. That's all I wanted to do in that moment. And I wanted him to tell me that everything was going to be okay. That's all I wanted from him. Everything's going to be okay. And, unfortunately, when I landed in Roanoke and when I grabbed my bags and ran outside, I can still see the terminal plain as day. As I'm running outside, I go outside, I'm looking everywhere. Where's my dad? This is a very small airport. Like, he's going to be here any minute now. And instead, my cousin and my uncle Mike pulled up and got out of the car and we, exchanged hugs, but very few words. And I just remember thinking to myself, my dad, he's probably taking care of things. It's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. And, as we get back in the car and we start driving to leave the airport, I finally worked up the courage to ask my Uncle Mike. I said, Uncle Mike, where's my dad? And he said, Lauren, I'm sorry, but your dad passed away too. And those words just cut me so deep because not only did I lose my mom, but within a few hours of each other, I lost my father. And now I just felt like my entire world, my entire support system, everything I knew growing up, everything that I loved and embraced was gone in an instant. And I just couldn't believe it. And at that moment in time, I wasn't as focused on what happened, but more of the fact that it did happen. And oh my gosh, how am I going to live my life without my parents, my two best friends, the people that I love the most?
I'm so sorry for your loss. Such a 1-2 punch, right? So take us through what happens next. I would imagine you and your brother start making arrangements. Does the family know what happened at this point?
Well, I think that's where some things become very gray and blurred. Because my aunt and uncle, my aunt, I call her my Auntie Linda. She was my mom's older sister, and they were like this, very close. And I think that her and my uncle had some idea that there was some struggle and that things were, had maybe progressed in terms of their reliance on the addiction medication. But I don't think that they too understood the severity of it. But I think, again, my parents did what they could to protect me and to protect my brother and to protect our family from this secret that they were harboring. And, I think while our family had an idea, there was no real, understanding of the chain of events, what led to this, how did this happen? And so a lot of things during that process, the investigation, when they were doing the autopsy reports, obviously the toxicology reports, investigating all the events that happened that day that led ultimately to my mom dying and then my father dying. A lot of that was kind of kept a secret or at least hidden for a while. But I'll never forget, it was at 90 days. And I say 90 days because that's exactly how long they had to be able to determine the cause of death. Was it accidental? Was it intentional? And both of their deaths were ruled accidental overdoses. And I remember going to the coroner's office to pick up the final paperwork and everything to sort of close everything and finalize. And I sat in the car. I would not go in. My aunt went in instead, and she walked out with this envelope, and she got in the car, and she sat down and she looked at me and handed it to me and says, "Do you want to read it?" And I said no. And I remember throwing it in the floorboard, and I wasn't interested in knowing what those reports said.
How come?
I think for me, as I was trying to piece some things together, trying to piece what had happened, because while both of their deaths were ruled accidental, my mom had passed first. She had overdosed from the fentanyl. She was prescribed fentanyl and had essentially taken the fentanyl, changed the way that you take it and took it orally. And so she took a toxic amount of fentanyl to get that immediate pain relief. And then that's when my father had found her. And I think that in many ways he was trying to cope with that loss, trying to cope with the fact that his wife was no longer here, and that maybe in some ways he felt responsible. I don't know what was going through his mind that day. And that's probably that was probably the hardest part for me, is not being able to get inside my mom's mind, my dad's mind, to understand what led to this. And I think in some ways I felt betrayed. I felt betrayed because it's like, how does this happen? How in the world can we go this long and then like that, gone? And it just didn't make sense to me. And I think in many ways I was terrified of opening those toxicology reports because I knew that the truth was lying in those papers. But what was the truth? And in my mind, I knew that if it had anything to do with prescription drugs, with addiction, then their legacy would be destroyed, that they would be judged for their choices and their decisions. And ultimately, that would be a reflection on me and my family as well, and those of us still here living today. And so to me, it felt like if I could ignore the truth, ignore what had happened, then I could fabricate this story in my head that certainly was true. And that's really what I did. I used that time to heal, because people were treaded lightly and didn't ask a lot of questions early on. I think there was a lot of conversations happening on the side. Sure. But it allowed me time to heal, and it started to manifest within me of, okay, I can piece together what happened. My mom died of respiratory failure. Well, that sounds a lot better than my mom died of an overdose.
Okay.
And
so
then
after your parents died, that was the official cause of death, say at the wake or funeral, was respiratory failure. And with your dad, what was the diagnosis or cause of
The
death?
same was respiratory failure. So he too had taken the fentanyl. He had gone to the hospital, taking care of things with my mom, had come home, and the hospital actually felt that he was unstable. And so they called him to check on him. He answered the phone, and then he excused himself from the phone and collapsed right there. And we lived in a very rural part of Virginia, Giles County or Newport, Virginia, out in the mountains. And so it took quite a bit of time for them to get to my father. And at that point, he, upon arrival, was already dead. And, my dad, I think, had taken that medication to cope. I think he had taken that medication to cope with what he was dealing with. He had taken an Ambien. I think he really just wanted to sleep. I think he wanted to sleep. I think he wanted to rest. And unfortunately, it was a toxic amount that took his life. And so, you know, I think for me, I hung on the thought for so long, did my parents leave this earth intentionally? Did they give up on this life? And truly in my heart, I'll never know those answers. And as a woman of faith, I know those answers lie above. But in my heart of hearts, I know that my parents loved me and they loved my brother unconditionally, and, would fight and fight and fight for me and my brother to have the best life that we can. And honestly, I just think that the addiction caught up with them, and they were just drowning and they were suffocating, and they couldn't find a way out. And I think that is my message and why I am here today, to share with people just the importance of transparency, of being vulnerable and being open to sharing that, and to know that there is help out there and there is hope for people that are struggling with this addiction that can have an almighty grip on people, so much so to the point where, maybe they don't feel like it's worth living this life and being here on this earth. But I want to share that message to people and let them know that they are worth it, and this life is worth it, and that people love you, and people want to hug you and want to hold you, and want to help you, and that there is help and there is hope, and that we can, open doors to a brighter tomorrow for people that are battling this addiction.
And we're so happy that you're willing to do that, because I think the biggest thing that you hit on is the stigma and the shame. And what's interesting about your perspective is that we often think of the shame and stigma as impacting the person with the substance use disorder. And we kind of don't think too much about how it impacts the family and things like that. So what advice do you have for other families who feel shame around their family member that may be suffering with a substance use disorder? And how can they break the cycle and help to end the stigma surrounding it?
Well, I'm gonna, whoever might be out there watching right now, I'm gonna look you right in the eye here and tell you, I was there. I was there. And let me tell you, I was there for so many years. I think a lot of people, they see me talking about it now. They see me sharing my story so boldly and with great courage. But it took me 7 years to even acknowledge what happened to my parents. I ran so far from reality. I ran and I ran and I ran. 2 weeks after burying both of my parents, I went back to Rutgers. I went into this protective bubble, to this place that was my comfort zone. That's where I was supposed to be. And so I was living out my life, but I was running so far from reality. I was running away from the truth of what happened to my parents, and I ran for 7 years. And ultimately what happened is my auntie Linda, she would try to share bits and pieces of what she knew about my parents and about their struggles with me. And as she started piecing things together, she would try to share those things with me. But unfortunately, I wasn't having it. I was angry. I was upset. No, that's not true. Like, don't tell me that stuff. And I would just shut it down, and I would just resist and resist and resist. But over the course of time, as my healing began, and as really I started to become more educated on what addiction was, and understanding that this can impact anybody and everybody, and nobody is exempt from addiction. I built up these walls, these brick walls around myself, and I started, you know, just using it as a protective layer around me and my family. But she started one by one pulling those bricks away. and, we'd have a little bit more of a conversation and a little bit more of a heart to heart. And finally, those walls started to come down. And I'll never forget sitting, as I'm working on my career in sports broadcasting. I'm in Parkersburg, West Virginia, and I remember sitting there and talking to a colleague of mine, and we got into a conversation, and my aunt started opening up about what had happened to my parents. And for the first time, I didn't tell her to be quiet. I didn't try to cut her off or change the narrative or change the direction of the conversation. I just let her talk. And that was like the first step for me of, okay, now I'm starting to acknowledge it. And then as time went on, I started to be able to feel this empowerment to share that story with people. But it took even several more years. It was 10 years before I actually opened that envelope with my parents' toxicology reports in there. 10
Wow.
years. Because I felt that, as I mentioned before, if I didn't see it and I didn't acknowledge it, then it wasn't there. It wasn't reality. And so, it took a few more years after I started to accept what had happened to my parents to openly be able to share that with other people. And it would start with a one-on-one conversation, and I would get more and more comfortable. If I could only have a recording of every conversation I had about my parents, oh my goodness, the timeline of that, and just the up and down, and just I would literally fail a polygraph test. No doubt about it, because I'm telling you, I just would weave this narrative in and out. And finally, as I got more and more comfortable and less ashamed of what happened to them, I realized that I was starting to break free. I was breaking free from the shackles of shame. And I'll tell you where things really changed for me. When I got into sports broadcasting and I was building up my career and taking those steps to, get to the next level and keep, achieving success in broadcasting, I was tasked with this opportunity to share people's stories. And that was so great. I didn't even realize when I got into sports broadcasting that I was going to have this opportunity to share stories. I was going to get to be a professional storyteller. Like, this is amazing. But what's crazy is I couldn't even share my own story. So people would come to me, oh, I've got this great story. My son overcame this injury or lost his mother to this, or, whatever it may be. And I would just see the cyclical effects from it. Just the people that were inspired by it and their lives were changed by seeing someone overcome something. And yet I couldn't even share my own story. And I felt that I could be a voice for other people, but I had lost my own voice. And that's when I said,
I feel like a fraud in a way, like you couldn't be open about yourself and your story, but you could tell other people's.
Yeah, I absolutely felt like a fraud. I felt like I was living this lie, that I was essentially using everyone else's story to cover up my own story and to, find purpose in their stories. And then it was like, wait a sec. And that's when the light started going off inside of me of, wow, like I can make a difference. I can use my story to help other people. Just as I'm helping others be a voice and a platform, I can do the same. And so that encouragement really led me to where I am today, to be able to openly stand up. And I honestly feel like I'm standing up in their name and their honor, and that they would be applauding me in this where I stand today. And I think that's the encouragement I want to give to other people is, it's so hard, because I do see it time and time again where I talk to parents and people that are just so ashamed and so scared to allow others to realize that their loved one is struggling with addiction. Mm-hmm. And they don't want to talk about it. And, they're just afraid of that judgment, and they're afraid of what people are going to think of them. And that was my feeling for years and years and years. I thought I would miss out on job opportunities because people would look at me and say, oh, I don't know if we want to touch that, because, she might fall into the same trap as her parents, or she might not be qualified because of addiction. Right. So we put this label on addiction, and it qualifies us in some sort of way, because that's what society has placed on it. So we have got to rip off those labels. And the more transparent you can be the more forthcoming you can be. Find your safe space. I mean, this is what we're here for, right? Shatterproof. Hello. This is a space. This is a space where you can relate to people, where you can stand tall with people around you and lock arms and realize they're going through some of the same things. And addiction comes in so many different shapes and sizes and forms. And I said before, it does not discriminate. We are not alone. We are all battling this thing together. And you said it's a family disease. It absolutely is. I look at it like we get in the car and it's like you've got someone that's in addiction at the steering wheel. They are driving out of control and we are all in the car buckled up in for the ride of our lives. It is an ongoing battle day in and day out, and it is emotionally exhausting. But I think the more that we can all come forward and break this stigma and show people that we have a voice and a place in this community, that we can stand tall against this disease, that we can stand tall against this, and this is not going to define you. You know, my whole mantra is to fall in love with your story. So I believe that we as people have an opportunity to fall in love with our story, whether we are the addict or we are the loved one of an addict. That if we can fall in love with our story and embrace our story can unlock someone else's story and someone else's truth, and can ultimately lead us down this path to open doorways and to help people realize that they are worthy of a better quality of life, and that they can too find hope and recovery and live their best life, and use that to share with the world and shine light on the world, despite the challenges that they faced.
So things often happen in life for no good reason at all. But I'm a firm believer that at the very least, the pain that we suffer and the things that we go through can at least help another person struggling the same type of struggle, if nothing else. So what type of advice would you give to someone who may have a loved one, a family member, coworker, struggling with a substance use disorder to kind of help them?
Yeah, I would just first and foremost start with, those open conversations, being transparent, being vulnerable, and really showing that love. Because it's amazing as I've ventured around and had conversations with people. The one thing that I've learned, there was anger, there was betrayal, there was just this feeling of hurt. Because unfortunately, with addiction, unlike some other diseases and illnesses that people face, addiction does come with some negative consequences, lying, cheating, stealing, various things that can be attached to addiction, and decisions that can be made that can hurt all of us that are involved. And so there is that level of betrayal, but through it all, you have to open your heart to find that love. You have to find that love for that person, that no matter what they're going through, that they can fight and that you can fight alongside them and show them a better path to tomorrow. And, it's not going to be easy. You are going to fight sometimes so hard because you love that person. And I think that's what I want to encourage people to do, is to find that love in their heart. And while they, might be angry or upset or feel betrayed, just know that person is fighting something so much greater than themselves. They are fighting this battle that is not them. And that's how I viewed my parents, that my parents were fighting this addiction. They were fighting this internal battle with themselves day in and day out. And that was not the essence of my parents. That's not what defined my parents. And whatever addiction or whatever trouble that your loved ones are going through, do not allow that to define them. Ultimately, that is going to be one chapter in their story, because our stories are never over. And we get to flip the pages and, open up chapters to, a roller coaster ride. There's going to be the good, there's going to be the bad, but you just got to hang on tight and know that there is hope at the end of the road. And if you can continue to inspire and encourage that person, and sometimes it does come with tough love. Sometimes you have to be told no. Even for me, for instance, as I'm going through my career at Rutgers, there were times that I wanted to wave that white flag and just, yeah, I'm good. I don't need your help. But I really felt that I was embraced by people around me, and the resources that I had were given to me. But I was told, we're not going to do this for you. You have to pick yourself up and take that first step. So, as an addict or a loved one of an addict, you've got to pick yourself up and take that first step. You've got to find the resources. Resources are out there, they're abundant. And I know Shatterproof is a great place to start in finding those resources. Um, and it's not one size fits all, and it's not instant gratification. It's not going to be something that happens overnight. But I can assure you that if you pick yourself up and stand tall and take that first step, you will find that you will generate strength and courage, and you will start to open yourself up to a pathway that I believe can be so inspiring and encouraging for other people. And then you get to be that vessel of hope and that example for other people and that role model for other people to say, hey, they got through it, I can get through it too. And that's just my encouragement to people, is just to keep moving forward. And there are going to be some tough days ahead, but I promise you there is light, and you are going to open doors to possibilities that you just never thought possible.
That's really great advice. Another question that came to mind that I wanted to ask is, when you were grieving the loss of your parents, what did people around you do that was extremely helpful? And was there anything that people said or did that you did not like or did not appreciate or made you feel worse?
Well, I think that the hardest part through the entire process is obviously opening that communication and allowing people in, because I had built those walls. I had pushed people away, and I had almost isolated myself in many ways of, I don't need your help. I'm good. I've got this. I'm good. But ultimately opening your heart to that. And sometimes words just aren't enough. Sometimes, um, there's not enough words to share with someone to take the pain away. And when you say, well, I know what you're going through, but do you really? And I think sometimes that's the hard part, because we as humans are searching for those words to help people get through a traumatic experience or a loss. But I think just being there, being a listening ear, being that sort of beacon of hope, and really just allowing them in some ways to kind of steer the ship for you, right? Just letting them know you're there, having those open-ended conversations, letting them know when they're ready to talk, that you're there for them, and that you want to provide them resources and anything that you can do to help them in their journey. But sometimes it kind of starts with them opening up and allowing them to feel that they have a safe space to go to have these conversations. And I think that's why it's just important to, um, you know, be there and let them know you're there. And then ultimately, kind of give them the floor, give them the opportunity to share what they want to share. And kind of like my aunt, she did the same thing with me. She would try to open up that conversation, and there were times where I wasn't having it, but as she continued to do so, um, I would start to open up more and more and more. And everyone's timeline is different, and that's what I want to encourage people. The point of comparison, that's the hardest part, because we want to compare ourselves to everyone else. We see everyone's highlights. You get on social media and it's like, oh wow, that person's got the life, man, everything they're doing, they're always so happy. But yeah, you're seeing one snippet, one snapshot of someone's 24-hour day in a photo. Of course, they're going to show you their best stuff, right? They're going to show your highlights, but we're all battling something internally. We're all going through something. And so, having a voice and being able to speak out was my biggest sense of freedom. That's when those shackles came off. And so I encourage people that instead of bottling it up and keeping it in, let it out. And there are places that you can go to do that anonymously. Counseling services, obviously different support groups that can really help with that. Because I can tell you, um, uh, I am such an open book, and almost too much to a fault. My husband jokes with me sometimes. He says, Lauren, do you have to tell everybody everything? And I'm like, well, but it's amazing, because you don't know what your messaging, what your conversation, what little bit of information you share with someone can do to open up and unlock their prison, to unlock their shame and what they're going through. And I have a multitude of stories of how that has played into my life in so many ways, years and years down the road, because you don't always know when you've helped someone. But if you can be vulnerable and be transparent and give people a feeling of security in that vulnerability and transparency and authenticity, I think it will open up so many doors and will show people that they truly can be, kind of freed from whatever it is that they feel they're trapped and tied to. And, as it pertains to addiction, I think so many people are feeling that same way, that isolation and I'm alone in this, but you're not alone. You're absolutely not alone. And I think we've got so many people out there ready to fight arm in arm with you. You just got to let them. You just got to open your heart and you just got to let them.
That's great advice. Your story is so inspiring to watch you come from this horrible loss to then transition into a space where you're able to move forward professionally and achieve all of your goals. And look, you're an ESPN reporter. And then even to take that further and be able to face some of the demons of your past and what really happened and realize the power in your story and be able to move forward with that and help other people. So it's all so inspiring. So we're so happy that you're here to do that. Tell us about what you have coming up next. You have some exciting things. I know you're working on a documentary.
Yes. So lots of different things happening. I guess in the world of Lauren Sisler, as we turn the page to 2021, we shot a documentary not too long ago that sort of illustrates a short feature film that illustrates sort of my story and sort of the beginning to where we are today. And really, it's just sort of the launching point or the platform to spark the conversation, to show people to show people that this thing exists. And even now more than ever, coming out of this pandemic, as we're starting to hopefully turn the page and put things behind us, it's going to be a slow process and it's going to be a long process. But, to let people know that, addiction and suicide and all those things are hitting an all-time high. They are peaking right now. People feel alone. They feel isolated. They feel removed from society. They feel, all the weight of the world coming down on them, whether it's their finances or, job security, a multitude of issues that people are facing and battling right now. And so we want to be the catalyst for that conversation and that call to action. So we're calling this series Beyond the Sidelines, and it's going to be a multi-part series that we're going to kind of travel around virtually to different communities around the country, starting here in Birmingham, Alabama, where I currently live, but opening that up to audiences around to view the documentary, but also be part of panel discussions and really just start the conversation and find that call to action and show people where they can go to get help and to really get involved in this, get behind this thing, because everyone is going through this. Everyone knows someone that is impacted by addiction. And so we can't sit here anymore and watch it unfold and unravel. We've got to stand up and we've got to do something about it. So I'm hopeful that this virtual series, this virtual tour will help to be a catalyst for that. And again, we're calling it Beyond the Sidelines. So you can find more information. We'll be posting about it on our social media channels, my social media channel at Lauren Sisler on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And then of course, my website at laurensisler.com.
Awesome. Sounds like an incredible project. I have to say that I think your parents would be so proud of the work that you're doing. And I know I can speak for everyone at Shatterproof and probably everyone viewing this that we're just so appreciative that you're taking the time to share your story and help countless people moving forward. So thank you so much for being here, Lauren. For more information about Lauren's upcoming documentary, Beyond the Sidelines, please visit laurensisler.com or follow her on social. Thank you again.
Thank you.